Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the Detailer's Lab. So today what we are going to be doing is kind of debunking the old buff and wax myth. I'm sure a lot of you pro detailers out there, or even some of you hobbyists or enthusiasts who are working on friends' cars, family member cars, or doing this as a career, you get a lot of people that call and say, hey man, I want my car buff and waxed. Well, anybody who's been doing this long enough knows that buffing and waxing is a thing of the past. Buffing is an incredibly aggressive method of correcting paint, and it's an essential step in paint correction, but as a standalone service, it's something that you really don't want to do and you don't really want to offer, and we will go over why in the video. Wax, that's to each their own. And a lot of people put wax on sealants to help extend them. Wax is a standalone. We don't really offer it much at my shop, but this video is more or less just to cover why buffing really is kind of frowned upon just as a standalone service. It doesn't give you that clarity, it doesn't give you that refined look. There's other steps after the fact that we have to do when buffing. So should you just be buffing your car standalone? No. You should not just be taking a wool pad to a car or grabbing a rotary or anything like that, buffing it and walking away. You're going to have an unfinished product, you're going to have an unfinished finish, and if you're doing it for income, you're going to have a very unhappy customer. So we highlight some of these things here in the video. So without further ado, you can take a look at this video and we'll give a short recap after. All right, so basically here what we've got is a 2013-ish Dodge Ram. Hopefully you can see these scratches, but we've already polished this car. The thing with this is this truck needs a lot more than a polish, so you can see all these scratches and everything. There's still a ton of defects in the paint. So a lot of people ask like, hey, can you just buff my car? And you can, but you can't just buff and walk away. There always has to be a second stage of what's called paint refinement, because when you buff it, you're using an aggressive compound, an aggressive pad to reduce all those deep defects, but then you in theory put smaller defects in the paint. So I'm gonna show you an example of that. So remember this image right here of how there is all these swirls and all these scratches. I'm gonna hit it with a wool pad and some heavy compound and kind of show you what it does. All right, so we've wooled it here, and that's what's called a heavy cut. And you'll notice that it knocks down a lot of the scratches, but you will see that there's a ton of swirls in the paint here. So it's kind of hard to see on this paint. You can definitely tell that the scratches are knocked down. Let me wipe my camera here because I've got some schmutz on here. Let me take this off. See, with the naked eye, you can clearly see them. It's hard with this paint, but there are micro. You can actually see them. See all that micro swirling? When you come over here where I haven't buffed, you can see how the paint is cleaner. There's scratches, but the paint is clean and refined. Here, it's hazy and it's not crisp. So what we have to do is go over that with a polish. It's basically the equivalent to sanding with different grits of sandpaper. So this is why you cannot just buff a car. The paint, it's hazy. It's not refined. It's not finished. Here you can see how the paint is finished. So now all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna polish this, and you're gonna see how much better this paint looks when polished. So when you buff, when you cut, it has to be a two-stage polish, or I should say a two-stage process, not polish. You have to follow it up with a polish. If you want proper paint refinement, if you want your paint to look as good as it can, these are the steps you need to do. So now, what I am doing is I am putting a different pad on. I had a wool pad, a 5-inch wool pad. I'm now putting a 5.5-inch polishing pad on, and I'm going to use a polish instead of a compound. So a polish doesn't have as heavy abrasives. It's not as aggressive, and what this will do is smooth all this paint off, and this will be a real quick process here. Polishing doesn't take quite as long. All right, right, so don't mind my awkward stature as I was polishing that car. I was trying to give you guys a good shot of me polishing that. But what I'm gonna do now is I'm just removing this polish, and I'll hit the light on there, and you will see how crisp and clean the paint looks. Now there are still deep scratches in here, so this would be something where if this particular customer wanted more work done, we'd have to just go in and knock those scratches down and really get into heavy paint correction, okay? We've already done a basic paint correction here by doing these 2 steps, but you know, there's cars where you have to go over them over and over and over. Okay, so now we polish it and look how clean it looks. Okay, let me take my phone off the tripod here. So look how clean and crisp that paint is now. So this is why you can't just buff a car. Now there are still scratches. You know, obviously this was just a demonstration. When you go into paint correction, you would want to work back over all that. But this is a section where we just polished. It's refined, it's smooth, but there's a lot of scratches, okay? We come over here where we've done a heavy wool buff and then a polish, and look how much less scratches there are. Obviously this truck has been through a lot. You know, this would be a real job to paint correct this. Like I said, essentially the purpose of this video is to show you why you cannot just buff a car. You're leaving the paint unrefined, it's chopped up, it's swirled, you don't have that crisp, clean finish. So if you are a detailer, if you are a customer who is saying, I just want my car buffed, in today's day and age with the paints that are out there, it is not possible. You can do a single stage polish, you may be able to do a light single stage correction, but as far as buffing a car, you cannot do that. This car ultimately does need a buff, a heavy buff, and hours of doing that to get all these scratches out. But that's the main reason why. Like I said, the best analogy I have is you know, basically, you know, using sandpaper. Buffing a car, you're using 80 or 100 grit sandpaper. The paint, if you're sanding that, the wood would not be smooth, it would be choppy. It would look terrible when painted. You have to smooth it out, so you have to follow up with a finer sandpaper. Just like when you buff a car, you have to go over it with a finer action, in this case polishing. So a finer pad and a finer polish to get that smooth finish with that mirror-like shine. But like I said, the truck does look good. I just wanted to give you guys that example here of why when you buff, you must polish. All right, guys, so there it was. Hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of insight on buffing and really the fact that what buffing is it is a step in the paint correction process. It really isn't something that should be done standalone. The reality is with today's car paints, the grade of them, the majority of them are water-based, they're very delicate. So when you use a wool pad and a heavy compound, whatever machine you're using, it generates a lot of heat. It's very aggressive. You may have heard in the video I use the sandpaper analogy. It's basically like going over a piece of wood with 80 or 100 grit sandpaper and then just slapping paint over it. It's gonna look terrible. It's not gonna be smooth, it's gonna be coarse, it's just gonna look all rigid. It's not something that you would wanna present on a trophy shelf or give to a customer or maybe a loved one for a Christmas gift. And that's the same thing with buffing. You know, you never wanna just buff your car. You've seen in the video how it was all swirly, how it was unfinished. The section that I did to the left of it, just polished, it was crisp, it was clean, all the scratches weren't gone, but the finish was good. So that really where it kind of comes down to, you know, when you're depicting these different jobs, you have to, you know, kind of talk to your customer and find out the expectations. Or if you're doing a project yourself, you have to kind of sit back and say, how much time do I want to put into this job? What condition is my truck in? Obviously the truck behind me, it does need a lot more work, but this particular client was just looking for depth, gloss, luster, which is what we provided. It has a ton of deep scratches. This car would need hours and hours and hours of paint correction, likely a 3-step. So when you get into jobs like this, you really kind of have to sit back and say, okay, what does this vehicle need? But for the most part, the majority of your cars, with the way car products have, in the detailing industry, have evolved, there's no reason just to pick up a polisher or a buffer and grab a wool pad. You're not going to be happy with the end result. It's a very aggressive form of paint correction. It is an essential step, but again, it is a step, so it needs additional steps after to really be done properly. So hopefully this video gave you guys a little bit of insight. As far as the whole buff and wax thing, like I said, me personally, I don't really use a lot of waxes. Wax is not going to fix what buffing does. So when you swirl that up, when you haze it up, wax may temporarily cover it, but as soon as that wax starts to dissolve and disintegrate, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks down the road, the paint's just gonna look terrible again, all hazy, all swirled. So you don't want to wax, you want to polish. So you'd want to buff and polish and then put your sealant or your wax or anything on at the end, and you do a finishing pad and things like that. So if you guys need any more explanations, feel free to comment in the comment section. If you like the content that you're seeing, thank you very much for supporting this channel. We will have a lot more content, a lot more how-to videos, and a lot more helpful videos in the future for you. And if there's something you'd like to see specifically, don't hesitate to shoot us a comment in any of the video sections, and we will try to get that up for you as soon as we can. So we thank you again for tuning into the Detailer Lab, and we'll see you